The smell of smoke lingered long after the screams faded. In a village buried beneath snow, a house once filled with laughter now stood black and skeletal. The villagers whispered that its owner, a woman whose husband had died too soon, had brought the ruin upon herself. The church bell tolled not for her soul, but to warn others the widow's wealth had cursed the town. Her land would now pass to the crown, and her ashes would serve as proof that the order of men, and of God, had been restored. This was Europe in the age of suspicion, when women who owned too much, lived too long, or grieved to loudly risk being branded not merely inconvenient, but unholy. For centuries, the word widow carried a hidden warning. Beware the woman who has outlived her usefulness. The late Middle Ages and Renaissance promised the rebirth of reason, yet beneath its marble arches, fear still ruled. Wealth was rare, and lineage sacred. When men died, their estates hung in limbo, and the woman left behind became both prize and peril. If she remarried, her fortune moved to another house. If she refused, she was seen as hoarding what belonged to the bloodline. Her survival itself was political. By the end of this story, you'll see how the witch, that icon of evil womanhood, was often nothing more than a widow with land, property, or influence enough to unsettle the fragile balance between inheritance and patriarchy. This is the tale of Europe's most profitable persecution, the one that turned fear into policy and women into currency. Hold property for life, but true ownership returned to her husband's male kin at her death. To outlive one's husband was to borrow time, and every breath beyond his became a negotiation. The church portrayed widows as sacred figures of patience. Yet behind the sermons, preachers warned that idle women invited the devil. The boundary between holiness and heresy was thinner than parchment, and when harvest failed or fortune soured, the people looked for reasons, and often found one in the lone woman, who still held her husband's farm. In 1563, in the Bavarian town of Dillingen, records describe the trial of Anna Ebler. Her husband's sudden death had left her with 3 fields and 2 oxen. Within months, her neighbors claimed their milk turned sour after she walked past their stalls. The priest noted she had not wept enough during Mass. By spring, she was executed for witchcraft, her estate absorbed by the local monastery. Anna's story was not rare. Across Europe, legal and religious systems worked in tandem to erase inconvenient women under divine pretext. Witch became shorthand for any woman who could disrupt the flow of property, from the dead to the living, and always back to men. It was a system fueled not by theology, but by accounting. And as inheritance laws grew stricter, accusations became easier. By the time the Protestant Reformation split Christendom, both sides found new reasons to purge ungodly women. Catholic judges spoke of demons. Protestant ones spoke of sin. The outcome was the same. The widow's land changed hands, her name erased. Germanic and Swiss lands. Not in random fits of madness, but through calculated networks of law. Clergymen, magistrates, and landlords found profit in purification. Each trial meant confiscation, and each confiscation meant wealth redistributed to the loyal. Widows, spinsters, and unmarried heirs were ideal targets. Without a man to defend them, their rights fell into gray zones easily rewritten by divine mandate. In Scotland, the kirk courts invented phrases like maleficium of greed, a sin that described nothing but prosperity without male oversight. In 1627, the Wurzburg trials consumed nearly 900 souls. One chronicler noted a pattern. Many victims were widows of merchants and officials. Their silver and land titles were auctioned within days of their executions. The church called it cleansing. The state called it order. But the ledgers told another story, a silent economy of blood. These widows became both scapegoats and solutions. Their punishment fed not only superstition but infrastructure. Their property funded bridges, churches, even town defenses. Fear had become a form of revenue. Imagine the scene, a twilight marketplace, where the townsfolk whisper of curses while officials weigh confiscated jewelry on scales. Behind the smoke and sermons lies a simple truth. Witchcraft accusations were often financial strategies disguised as faith. But how did entire societies reconcile conscience with such cruelty? The answer lies in the merging of theology and ownership. If all property was ultimately granted by God, then the death of a heretic was not theft. It was restoration. This belief allowed centuries of moral blindness to flourish. To accuse was holy. To profit was divine reward. And to question was heresy. Nowhere did this system reach greater precision than in 17th century Germany and France, where superstition met taxation. The authorities recorded even the smallest properties of the condemned, rings, pots, livestock, down to the last coin. The witch was stripped not only of life, but of lineage. And yet, not every case was open persecution. Some women played the system, using the same structures of faith to protect themselves. In England, Certain widows joined confraternities or donated to the church to shield their estates. Others remarried strategically, choosing aged or infirm husbands, whose passing would again leave them for a time in control. To live as a widow was dangerous. To live as one twice widowed was either brilliance or blasphemy. But the witch panic was only half the story. Beneath the flames burned an older prejudice, one born from medieval inheritance customs that treated women as temporary custodians of male wealth. The widow was a vessel emptied of purpose. A man's death disrupted the divine chain. Therefore, the woman must be contained, controlled, or raised to restore balance. In France, they called it le mal des veuves, the widow's curse. Superstition claimed that grief unfulfilled could fester into sorcery. A woman who mourned too long was suspect. A woman who remarried too quickly, condemned as calculating. Between those narrow walls, countless lives were crushed out by the 1650s. Pamphlets warned of devilish widows who poison heirs and usurp estates. The printing press spread paranoia faster than ever before. Every rumor fed the next trial. Every execution affirmed the next law. Behind the spectacle of heresy, Europe was codifying control. The systematic reduction of female autonomy under the guise of moral reform. The Enlightenment promised deliverance, but superstition died slowly. Even as philosophers preached reason, property law continued to bind women in silence. The witch trials faded, replaced by subtler punishments, debt, dispossession, and exile. Courts no longer burned women, they bankrupted them. In England's common law, coverture declared that a married woman's legal identity merged entirely with her husband's. She could not own, sue, or inherit independently. The widow regained partial status only upon his death, but even then, local lords could contest her rights. The ghost of the witch lingered in paperwork. In France, the revolution declared equality. Yet Napoleonic codes soon restored patriarchal order. Family, Napoleon wrote, is the foundation of the state, and man its head. The empire did not need witch hunts anymore. It had contracts. The logic of suspicion had evolved. Where flames once punished defiance, bureaucracy now smothered it quietly. A widow's failure to produce male heirs could mean eviction. Her refusal to remarry could brand her disloyal. The inheritance systems that once justified witch trials now survived as economic mechanisms, polished by reason, but born of fear. Still, resistance flickered. In the 18th century, reformers like Mary Estelle and Olympe de Gouges condemned inheritance law as spiritual bondage. De Gouges wrote, "A woman without fortune is invisible. A woman with it is condemned," for her words. She was executed during the Revolution's own purge of inconvenient truth. Thus, even Enlightenment carried shadows. Europe had traded pyres for prisons of paper, superstition for statute, but the widow's peril remained. Centuries later, we still inherit the echoes. The phrase witch hunt survives, a relic of the time when justice was measured in ashes. But beneath it lies something older, something quieter, the ancient dread of the independent woman, the one who could survive without permission. The widow was not a witch. She was the mirror society feared to face, a reflection of power beyond patriarchal reach. And so history tried to erase her, one accusation at a time. Yet her story endures, whispered in every document, every sermon, every flame that claimed to defend the divine. Because every empire that feared her needed her as symbol, scapegoat, and silent foundation. And though the fires are long gone, their smoke still curls in the language of law, inheritance, and gender. Next episode, The Church of Bones, how faith turned the dead into calf.